And but later on, I'm gonna get some direct, I'm gonna email you, okay,
The chair has my email, Stephen.
okay. And if you can give me, because I'm gonna bring that up to that's the Human Rights Department.
Absolutely.
And
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mohammed Sheikh. I'm the chair of Immigration Committee, Bronx County Board 1, City of New York, Borough of Bronx. Thank you all for attending here, and I want to say especially my board members who are supporting me here, and also we have a special guest from City of New York who are going to give you a presentation regarding the job, regarding the rights of our people, of our neighbors, of our communities. So this is an opportunity. If you have any questions, concern, please ask to Madam Lopez. She is here with us. Before I starting the meeting, I would like to take the opportunity to introduce each and everyone here today. Start from here. That's who you are, your name.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Palmers, and I'm the community coordinator for Bronx Community Board 1.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Roganoth, and I'm a reporter for the Mount Haven Herald.
Welcome.
My name is Issa Boubacar, the vice president of this committee.
Thank you.
My name is Abul Kalam, is on the Bronx Committee.
Next, please.
Urban First Neighborhood Resident.
Cool.
So my name is Lopez. I work for the New York City Commission on Human Rights in the Bronx. I'm Arthur and Trina.
there we go.
And I'll, share a few things about the human rights law with everyone.
Great. Argelia Ortiz, I am Secretary of the Immigration Committee. I'm a board member.
Thank you all for taking the opportunity and introduce yourself. So now I think it will be a short meeting today since Madam Lopez is here. Madam Lopez, this is your floor. Please carry on.
You don't want to cover anything else before I start, or?
No, I believe you can go first and then we can.
Some housekeeping. I'm really happy to be here. So thank you so much, Stephen, to the chair of the committee, and to Anthony Jordan, the district manager, for creating a space for me to be here today. But in terms of housekeeping, I heard that you said that you're a reporter with the Mount Haven Herald. Are you a community board member, or are you here on behalf of the press?
Media, local media.
I'm here on behalf of press.
Okay, so the presentation cannot be recorded, and the agency has strict guidelines in terms of like communication and press. So if you would want to learn more about like the commission from a press standpoint, or like report on it, like I can connect you to the communications team, so you can take it from there, get a sense from them in terms of like from the press perspective.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, like I didn't realize.
Okay, I'm also a resident.
Oh, you're a
here
resident
as well. So
got you. Okay, so then I thought you were here on behalf of the press. So if you're a resident, like that's great. You know?
Okay.
But if you're gonna be reporting on things, then I would need to put you in contact with our communications department. But it seems like maybe you're here with your resident cap today.
Yeah, I can come there.
Okay, so we can connect afterwards, and I'm happy to connect you to the communications team because they're very strict about that.
Okay.
But if you're here as a resident, like that's amazing. And we're all gonna learn together, and then I'm gonna learn from you guys. And vice versa. So my name is Serenis again. I'm an associate human rights specialist at the Commission on Human Rights. Does everybody know what the Commission on Human Rights is? Have you heard of it before?
Sure.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. A lot of people don't know about our agency, and a lot of people in the community don't know that we even exist. A lot of people are familiar with HPD, NYCHA, the Department of Buildings, Economic Corporation, and things of that nature. But a lot of people in the community don't know about the Commission on Human Rights. So our mission as an agency is to enforce the New York City human rights law. So we're going to be learning a little bit more on that. And since this is an immigration committee, I want to focus, specifically on immigration. But I'll give you an overview of the different protected classes of the human rights law.
The right key, like if you're going to the right.
The right key?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, awesome.
Yes,
Right, so this presentation is designed to give you a very broad level overview of the New York City Commission on Human Rights and our law that we enforce. So it should not be interpreted as the exact letter of the law, just to give you a very broad overview of what it's about. And then we're gonna have like a question and answer session at the end that I encourage you to, reserve your questions. And since this is a small group, like, as you have questions, we can make it like more intimate and more conversational style as we go on. So before we begin, we always give props and an acknowledgement to the Native American Lenape people that were here, 400 years ago before the white colonial settlers came through and took ownership of their land. So we're sitting on the land of what was the Lenape Native American community. So if you don't know a lot about this community, I encourage you to do a little bit of research. So you honor the ancestors of this land. So this is the agenda for today. We're going to be going over the City Commission right structure, the protections that exist against discrimination under the Human Rights Law, how you can contact the Commission on Human Rights to make a human rights complaint, the process in terms of how to do so, and a short evaluation at the end. So this beautiful picture that you see here is a picture of our staff at the Commission on Human Rights. So as you can see, we're a very diverse agency. We come from all walks of life throughout the New York City, throughout all the 5 boroughs of New York City. And a lot of us are women. And collectively, we speak more than 20 languages in the city of New York. So I'm fluent in Spanish. So if you want to invite me to give a presentation in Spanish, I'm happy to do that. We also have people at the agency that speak Arabic, French, and other languages. So, language access is something that's really important to us at the Commission on Human Rights. So definitely reach out if you want this presentation to be done in different languages. Okay, so like I said, the Commission on Human Rights, we're the government agency that polices and enforces the New York City Human Rights Law. So we assess violations to people that violate the human rights law and deny the rights of other people in the community within the 5 boroughs. And we also educate people not only about their rights under the law, but the obligations that they have under the law too. So we also educate businesses and landlords and entities like that to make sure that in the places of work, in hospitals, in schools, and things like that, they are not allowing an environment where discrimination persists. So we educate people about their rights and about their responsibilities. These are the 4 main divisions at the Commission on Human Rights. I work out of the Community Relations Bureau. So we're the bureau that does presentations like these. We engage with the community. We network with different community stakeholders throughout the city, community boards, etc., faith communities, grassroots organizations. And, we essentially exist to educate the public and take a proactive role to let people know what the human rights law is, because sometimes people violate the law without knowing. So we always want to give people a chance to know this is a human rights law, and you've learned about it. Now you cannot continue discriminating. So that's like what we do at the agency. And we forward discrimination complaints to a legal enforcement bureau. So the second division is the LEB Bureau, which is a legal division that basically looks at the complaints that are brought forward. And they're the ones that determine if something that is brought forward to the commission meets the threshold for the New York City Human Rights Law or not. So they're basically determining if something is discrimination or not. So that if you talk to me about an issue, which, our colleague, she said she's going to talk to me about, someone in the community that's facing disability discrimination. What I'm going to do is take the contact information, talk to the constituent, and then get in contact with our law enforcement bureau so that they can, assess it. So that's like what you do. Let's say that there's a discrimination matter that's happening and you don't want to go through, the normal route of just like giving somebody a fine for discrimination. You have the option of addressing it in another way. You have the option of, looking at mediation and looking at conflict resolution to address the discrimination issue. But in that case, everybody that is involved in the discrimination matter in that case needs to be in agreement that they want to go through the conflict resolution mediation route instead of the normal route. And then the 4th division is the Office of the Chair, which issues final orders, decisions, offers legal enforcement guidance, drafts policy and legislation, navigates different community stakeholders throughout the city, builds relationships, sometimes spearheads changes to the law. Because the human rights law is not static, it's something that's organic and that changes from time to time. And sometimes other entities like the New York City Council sometimes make recommendations to the New York City Human Rights Law to broaden it to, protect more neighbors. And then this division is also really important because let's say that you report something to the Commission on Human Rights, and then the Legal Enforcement Bureau makes a determination that you don't find to be favorable. That's something that you can appeal with the office of the chair. So if you don't like the ruling, or you feel like, you want another division to look at it more closely, you can reach out to the office of the chair. So it's like a very quick overview of the structure of the Commission on Human Rights. Okay. So within the Community Relations Bureau that I just spoke about, we have 5 community centers throughout the 5 boroughs. So there's one in the Bronx, Manhattan, Staten Island, etc. So the one in the Bronx is at 1932 Arthur Avenue, on the corner of Arthur and Tremont. You can take the 36 bus to go there, the 15, the 17. You could bike there. So then these community service centers exist to basically encourage people in the community to walk to the offices and report discrimination matters. Arthur Avenue and Tremont. Yeah. So you have the option of reporting something, either calling the hotline, looking at the website, and basically writing what the issue is and attaching evidence. And you also have the option of walking to one of the community service centers to report it with someone like me or my other colleagues at the Community Relations Bureau, so they can help you navigate how to report the discrimination issue. Within the Bureau, we also have the advisors that are experts in many different areas, one of them being the LGBTQIA community, reentry. Everybody knows what reentry is. People that essentially, make a mistake, they do a crime, right? And then they get sent, to the prison system, and then they do their time, and then they come back to the community. That's called reentry community. So basically communities that are justice impacted, that have made like a criminal record, and they're coming back home, from doing time, restarting their life. So then we have liaisons at the agency that are specialists in justice impacted reentry communities. We also have liaisons that are experts in African communities, youth initiatives, Muslim American communities as well, East Asian communities for housing, transgender, etc. We also have a housing specialist too, that are basically like liaisons and experts, in those subject areas in the community. Right. So the Office of the Chair, I think I spoke about that, so I'll pass that slide. And then the Law Enforcement Bureau, the legal division, the main structure is the info line. So the info line is where you can call and report discrimination matters. That info line is open from Monday through Friday from about 9 a.m. to about 5 p.m. So you can call the number and say, hey, this is what's happening to me. And don't be shy, because sometimes you may think you may not have a discrimination issue, but the most important thing that you can do is call the hotline, and someone from our legal intake team staffs this hotline. So you can call the number, be like, hey, this is what I'm going through. Is this discrimination or not? And they can let you know if it is. They'll take it a step further and give you an intake appointment, so you can come and talk about your issue, at the Commission on Human Rights. Okay. And then, we have staff attorneys at the Law Enforcement Bureau. We have special teams at the Source of Income Unit, which we'll learn a little bit more about. And pre-complaint investigations. So it's basically like, if you don't want to go through sometimes our legal team wants to fast track an issue, or because, reporting a discrimination issue takes a really long time, right? It's not something that happens from one day to the next. So sometimes what our legal enforcement bureau does, they're like, okay, let me do like a pre-complaint investigation. Let's say that there's a landlord that's violating, someone's rights, or in this case, denying somebody a ramp in front of the building. Okay, let's have us as a law enforcement bureau call the landlord and bring this to his or her attention. Hey, did you know that you're violating the law by not providing this ramp? Sometimes people don't know. And then, that's an option. And then we have testers that, pose as someone that's facing a discrimination issue. So let's say that I have a Section 8 voucher, I'm trying to get an apartment, I'm being denied housing because I have a Section 8 voucher. One of the ways that we test that is by having our attorneys like pose as somebody that has a Section 8 voucher versus somebody that doesn't have a Section 8 voucher to figure out, okay, where's the systemic discrimination happening? Like, is this like a local thing? So I think that's a really cool feature of the law enforcement. Is this information new to people? Yeah, do you feel like you're learning something?
Yes,
People are like really quiet.
I'm sorry, but
Steve,
you
I'm
got
looking like you're really intense. You're learning something?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I'm learning a lot,
Yeah,
actually.
a whole lot of times, a whole
Very
lot of
important information.
That we put out to the public. With
Right.
So,
Right, yeah, that's why we're here, because again, a lot of people don't know. All right, cool, so move on. So then, the New York City Human Rights Law prohibits discrimination in the areas that you see here, in employment, in public areas, in housing. We look at discriminatory harassment. We also look at bias-based profiling by law enforcement, because let's face it, sometimes law enforcement can be prejudiced, and sometimes they have been found to violate the human rights law. So that's definitely something that we look at, and law enforcement is not above our law. So in order to report an act of discrimination, you have 1 year to report an act of discrimination, unless it has to do with gender-based harassment. In that case, you have 3 years to report. So if something happens today on the 20th of September 2024, you have up to the 20th of September 2025 to report an act of discrimination. But if it has to do again with gender-based harassment, you get 3 years. Okay, hold on 1 second, Francis. Let me just finish this slide real quick. So remember, the New York City Human Rights Law only covers the 5 boroughs of New York. So let's say that you're somewhere in New York State outside of the 5 boroughs, in Albany, Poughkeepsie, Binghamton. If something that has to do with discrimination happens to you outside of the 5 boroughs, you'd have to reach out to the New York State Division of Human Rights. And they're like in the Fordham, Webster area, if that's something that you're interested in being connected to. You also have the option of reporting a discrimination issue to the New York State court system, and they give you 3 years to report a discrimination issue in the New York State court. So you had a question, Francis?
yeah, what about age?
Yeah, no, age is definitely, so this is coming. This is just giving you like a brief overview of the structure, what the New York City Human Rights Law is, but that's coming. All right, so to establish discrimination, there has to be a relationship between the people whose rights are being violated and the people or entity that are violating the rights of those communities. Okay, so there has to be like that connection in order to establish discrimination under the Human Rights Law. And these are some common categories that we see. Let's say that we have a Section 8 voucher tenants and a landlord who is denying services to the Section 8 voucher holding tenants. That's discrimination right there. And the relationship that exists is the relationship between the tenants and the landlord in this situation. All right, so getting back to the question that you just asked me, so who is protected? So it is illegal to threaten, intimidate, or discriminate based on these categories that you see here, including but not limited to these categories. Because again, this is a summary of the Human Rights Law. So as we can see here, it's illegal to discriminate against somebody because of their age, their immigration or citizenship status, their national origin, their color, disability. One of them is not here, and I like talking about it a lot because it impacts Black and Brown communities specifically, and that's hair texture. So like hair, you see I have curly hair, right? I'm a protected class under the Human Rights Law. You're a protected class under the Human Rights Law. And you too. So then, that's really important because sometimes you're in situations where, and Stephen too, sometimes you're in situations at work where somebody is saying, well, in order to look professional here, you have to straighten your hair, you have to take off your braids, etc. So hair is a protected class under the Human Rights Law under the Crown Act of 2016.
Oh, I did not know that.
So now you know.
Oh,
See?
okay,
So
that's
we're learning
interesting.
something today.
Well, actually goes back
So-
to it goes back to back to the 60s when they get considered Jews,
Mhm.
took the federal government to court mode of, they would be forced to, the males, when they would be forced to cut their hair and, eat the bills, if they want.
Oh, really?
Oh.
That happened?
I didn't know
Yeah,
that
well,
it
well, that-
extended. I just know about the 2016 Pride Act, but I learned something new today, so thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So let's move on, because we have a lot of ground to cover. So then, we have disability, emotional, mental, physical, are all protected classes in the human rights law. We have gender identity, we have height and weight, which is something that the New York City Council updated our law last year to include height and weight as protected classes in the human rights law. So now, if you're thin, if you're a little bit bigger, if you're tall, if you're shorter, you have special protection in the human rights law. It's illegal to discriminate against somebody's marital status, partnership status. Pregnancy is a protected class in the human rights law. Race, religion, creed. So if you observe a specific religion and you're not being allowed to pray a few times during your working hours, or you're not allowed to leave early or leave a little bit later to absorb your religion, that's something that could be a violation of the human rights law, because people's religion is something that's protected under the human rights law. Okay, so we have sexual orientation, so it's pretty self-explanatory. So people are LGBTQIA are also protected classes of the human rights law, and you cannot discriminate against somebody because of their sexual orientation. And you cannot discriminate against somebody because of, because they serve in the military, because they're a veteran. Okay?
Ms. Lopez,
Yeah.
quick question.
Yeah.
Out of all those categories, which one has received a lot of, pushback and,
Like a lot of complaints.
yeah.
So I would say, and you can check this out in the annual report, but disability tends to be the highest. And also discrimination based on source of income, which basically means like if you have a government subsidy to pay the rent, either Section 8, city FAPS, HASA, FAPS, etc. Those are the two biggest categories of discrimination that we see throughout the city.
Okay. And
That's
also,
why, promoting information on voucher discrimination and how to combat it is super important, especially in places like the Bronx, and disability.
what I meant by pushback, I also meant which one per se it's that's received controversy, oh really, why is weight being a protected human right, which out of those categories has received a lot of, in your opinion, if you can share.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I would say our trans community, sometimes, unfortunately they're discriminated against a lot. And you all know that if you're transgender, one of the rights that you have is to use the bathroom that you believe is in accordance with the gender that you believe yourself to be.
Right.
So sometimes in certain communities, that makes people, feel uncomfortable, there's, stereotypes that people have around that.
Sure.
But it's really important to protect our trans community because, when you look at it, the trans community is one of the most vulnerable communities in the city. So, I would say that depending on the communities that you go, our trans community can sometimes be targeted and denied rights, along with people that have disabilities and along with people that have vouchers to pay. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much.
So then, in addition to those categories, we have protections based on employment and protections based on housing, right? So then we have, remember I was saying about reentry communities, justice impacted communities, right? They're protected classes in the human rights law in the sense that if you're coming back home from serving time, you have the right to restart your life and apply for jobs and things like that. So if you, let's say that Stephen, I'm interviewing I have a record, right? I'm justice impacted, I'm coming back home. And Stephen has a position open in his business. And then, he says, hey, I like your experience. I'm going to give you a conditional job offer on the spot. And then, but for it to be official, I need to do a background check. And then the background check comes, and of course, it's going to come up that I have a record. And then he decides to rescind, to take away the conditional job offer based on that. So Stephen, in that case, could be violating the human rights But it's just to give you like a quick example. People that are justice impacted, that have criminal records, are protected classes of human rights law under the Fair Chance Act.
What is caregiver status? Caregiver.
Oh yeah, so caregiver is not a protected class category per se. It becomes discrimination. So let's say that we're all working together, right? And Stephen is our boss. And then some of us are caregivers. And let's say that, we have white American people also working. Black Americans, Latinos, like brown folks. But then, a lot of us are caregivers. Like we take care of like our families, like we, when we leave work. But then Stephen only gives the privileges to be able to leave early to take care of your loved ones to the white American. But then to everybody else, he's not giving the same privileges.
Oh,
So in that sense, it becomes discrimination because when you have a policy in place, you have to make sure that everybody's following that policy equally, and that you're not giving privileges to certain communities or certain protected classes and not others, or certain communities within that space. So if you're applying for a job, pre-employment marijuana testing is no longer allowed. There should be no questions about salary history. Do you know that if you're going to an interview and somebody asks you about your salary history, that's a question that's no longer allowed? And that's something that's really important because it was basically done to create gender equity, right, in terms of building generational wealth in the community. Because a lot of Black and brown women specifically, we were being lowballed at a lower salary at jobs. So let's say that I got out of college and I was making like $20,000, right? That's a really low salary. But what if every interview I go on, I get asked, oh, so like, what did you make when you got out of college? I'm gonna consistently be lowballed at like 20,000, 25,000, 30,000, like really low, right? And that's a systematic way of preventing our Black and brown communities from building generational wealth and not achieving, economic parity with everybody else. So that's why the elimination of salary history question is so important, for, economic mobility for our communities. I know this is a touchy subject, right? Depending on the community that you're from and your religious beliefs, but, sexual and reproductive health decisions are something that is protected under the Human Rights Law. So basically what that means is that, let's say that I had a job and Stephen is my boss, and he finds out that I'm considering family planning or contraception or an abortion, to put it plainly, because I don't want to keep expanding my family, because I can't afford it. And then Stephen finds out what I'm considering to do with my private time, with my private life. He's like, some days you're a good worker, you come to work on time, great, but I heard about this, that you're considering getting an abortion. So I have to let you go because that does not fall under our company policy, because the mission of our company doesn't support, these personal values. If Stephen does that to me, he's violating the human rights law. So that's what that means. Domestic violence survivors, survivors of stalking and sex offenses are all protected classes of the human rights law. So that basically means that if you're a domestic violence survivor, you cannot be denied employment opportunity, you cannot be fired for being a domestic violence survivor, even if your abuser shows up and causes a scene at work, right? Let's say Stephen again, like, I'm a victim of domestic violence, my abuser shows up, he's like, it's like, you're a good worker, I gotta let you go because look at what happened yesterday. That scene that your abuser caused, and now like your co-workers are really upset, they're uncomfortable, so I gotta let you go. If he does that, he's violated the human rights law. And in addition to that, he has to give me space so that I can pursue my order of protection in court during working hours. He can't be telling me that I have to do it like in my lunch hour or before or after work. He has to give me that time, during the working hours to do that. And if I ask to be relocated to another division of the company because I don't want my abuser to know where I work to protect my identity, he has to accommodate me as well if there's other locations in the company that he can transfer me to. So all those are the protections of domestic violence survivors in the workplace. And that's something really important specifically in the Bronx because as you may know or may not know, the highest rates of homicide connected to domestic violence are in this borough in comparison to other boroughs in the city. So we have a real crisis in the Bronx as it relates to domestic violence. That basically got worse during the pandemic. Well, as you can imagine, it's that, because domestic violence is not just physical abuse, it's emotional abuse, it's financial abuse, it's like a form of control. When an abuser, feels powerless, they want to control their partner. And it stems from insecurity, to be honest, in a sense of powerlessness. So, this is something that's really important to focus on in the borough of the Bronx, because there's a real crisis happening with domestic violence and a lot of deaths. So just know that if you or somebody that you know, somebody in the community is going through this, let them know that they're not alone. There's a lot of services available for domestic violence survivors. There's even a city agency that's dedicated specifically to combat domestic violence and gender-based violence. That's literally what their mission is. So super important. And then additional protections in housing, moving away from the job protections, we have lawful occupation. So let's continue to pick on Steven real quick. Let's say that Steven is now a landlord, and I'm trying to apply to get an apartment in his building, and then he finds out that I'm an attorney, right? And he's like, wow, her credit is like 800, like she makes like $150,000 a year, like everything is checking out, but I don't like the fact that she's an attorney, because if I'm not giving heat and hot water to the tenants in the building, she's gonna take me to court and she's gonna give all the tenants free legal advice. So I'm not gonna rent to somebody else. That's what he's doing, right? So if he does that, he would be discriminating against me based on lawful occupation, right? So that's discrimination. You can't deny an apartment to somebody because they have children, and you certainly cannot deny an apartment to somebody who's a domestic violence survivor, or say, well, I have to evict you because of the abuse, the noise is coming from your apartment, and the abuse that you're experiencing is making your neighbors feel uncomfortable, and they want me to evict you. That cannot happen, right? So domestic violence survivors cannot be evicted for being domestic violence survivors. Okay.
What about pets? I mean, yeah, quite a bit thinking about pets. People have pets, they call them that they need them as an aid to whatever. It's a government.
Oh, you mean like you try my emotional support animals, right?
Yes.
So that's something that's protected under the human rights law as well. That's covered under disability. So let's say that and I'm gonna go into that. Let's hold on to that, because that's gonna come up in the thing, in the presentation. All right, so we talked about gender quickly. So remember, gender is a protected class in the human rights law. So we always have to protect and respect the way that people want to show up in terms of the gender identity that they believe themselves to be. So we definitely have to respect that, even if what we see visually is different than what they themselves believe themselves to be. We have to respect that, and we need to create a space where we can ask for people's pronouns, make sure that we're addressing them correctly. Obviously, letting them use a bathroom that they believe themselves, that they need to use, etc. So I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. So getting to your question, so again, disability, protected class in the human rights law, and it's any physical, mental, medical, psychological impairment, that has to do with disability. Anybody with a disability must be provided with a reasonable accommodation. A reasonable accommodation is just a fancy way of saying you get a special permission for being a member of a protected class. In this case, like let's say that somebody needs a wheelchair ramp in their building. Like that's a reasonable accommodation. That's like a special permission that you can get for being somebody that has a disability, just because there are steps in front of your building and you're essentially trapped in the building because you can't get in or out. So then if you have a good faith conversation with your landlord, which is always a first step when you're requesting a reasonable accommodation, you always want to have a good faith conversation, whether it's with an employer, whether it's with a landlord, etc. Because when you report it to us, that's the first thing that we're going to ask you. Well, did you talk to a landlord about it? Okay, so then in this case, the person with the wheelchair, they are entitled to get a wheelchair ramp, and that's something that's a reasonable accommodation. All right. So, these changes could be structural, can involve architectural modifications, can involve policy changes. So let's say that there's a landlord that has a no pet policy for the building, but you have depression, anxiety, and it's been documented by your doctor. So then, in that case, the landlord should be able to revise the no pet policy for you to accommodate you, so that you can have a pet because of your mental illness. Any reasonable accommodation that you ask cannot pose an undue financial hardship on an employer, on a landlord, etc. So it can't be that in addition to asking for a wheelchair ramp, you're asking for a massage therapist, you're asking, for free coupons so you can get your hair done at the salon, like free trips to Italy. That's just beyond the scope of what a reasonable accommodation is, right? Reasonable accommodation can be something like a wheelchair ramp, a lobby lift, revising the building's no pet policy to accommodate you because you have that issue. So it has to be something that's within reason. And it's on the employer, the housing provider, or the public accommodation provider to prove the burden of undue hardship. So like your case, you were saying something that, we can't afford it, we can't afford this rent. So when that happens, remember, you always have to have the person have a good faith conversation to request accommodation. And if they come up with something like that, it's too expensive, I can't afford it, I don't get enough in rent. So what we do, when you report it to the commission, we do a financial analysis of the landlord's financial statements, of the rents that are coming into the building, and the expenses that are coming out, right? And if we determine they're making a good profit, we force them to comply to put the wheelchair in.
Okay.
So
I'm gonna be writing an email.
I will say though that sometimes the wheelchair ramps don't work out all of the time, just because you need at least 36 inches, right, to be able to accommodate a wheelchair. But yeah, so let's definitely talk about that.
Okay.
So that's why
Yeah, so this
no pattern house, the doors were kind of narrow, so the wide doors is up with ramp, bars in hallway.
Yeah, because sometimes the aisle is too narrow to accommodate.
The whole door.
Yeah.
It just took out the whole door and made it wider.
Right, exactly, right. So this slide basically talks about, what I just said, that, if somebody saying, I can't afford to do it, like if Steven says, I can't afford to, do this and put the wheelchair ramp, we'll go into his financial statements. We'll go into his profit. If he's making a profit, we'll push it to the profit. So then employment discrimination. So who's protected in terms of employment? The employer has to have at least 4 or more employees for the law to kick in and protect everybody, unless it's an employer that hires domestic workers. So domestic workers is basically anybody that works in a home-based setting, whether it's a home attendant, a home health aide, a nanny, a babysitter, somebody that's gardening. Somebody works in a home-based setting as a full-time employment. In that case, for the law to kick in and protect those people, a domestic worker employer needs at least 1 or more employees. Okay? So remember, the same things apply. Reported within the last year, statute of limitations, unless it has to do with gender-based harassment. And in terms of the counts of what kinds of employees are covered, these are the kinds of employees that are covered. It also covers interns, it covers undocumented workers, okay, part-time probationary workers, etc. Even in the employer's family, they're working. So let's say that Steven is a restaurant owner. You have many different roles tonight. So let's say that Steven is a restaurant owner.
I'm a jack of all trades.
And let's say, what kind of restaurant you have? What kind of cuisine?
Italian.
Italian. Okay. So let's say that Steven is a restaurant owner of an Italian restaurant, and he's looking for a chef. He's like, okay, I want somebody who's Italian to cook this, Italian food, and he puts out the announcement. That's a discriminatory announcement, because in reality, anybody that has experience cooking Italian cuisine, can cook Italian cuisine. So a better way that he could say it is, I'm looking for somebody with experience cooking Italian cuisine to be a chef here. You see the difference? It's like a really huge difference. And he can't be saying like, I don't want a chef that has a criminal history, etc. Like, because that's out. That's like discrimination. Okay. And you cannot be fired, for your age, race, etc. Because of your gender, your pregnancy, disability, sexual orientation. You cannot be demoted, things like that. Because again, these are the protections that we have as employers. So if someone is saying, well, I have to fire you because you're undocumented, or I have to fire you because you're pregnant. I don't know if you're going to be able to, complete your job responsibilities. That's all discrimination. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What if they don't say it, but it's like it's
Yeah,
subtle?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So like, that's actually how it presents itself most often, and that's when our tester unit comes in. What I was talking about earlier before, and then like they kind of get to the bottom of it and pose as people to see if there's systematic discrimination going on. But you're absolutely right. Like most of the discrimination, that's why it's so hard to figure out if you're being discriminated against, because it can be very subtle. It's not in your face most of the time, right? So I would say like if you feel like, because sometimes if your body tells you like if something's wrong, right? If you feel off about something, or you like you feel like did this happen? Like could that be discrimination? Don't hesitate and call the hotline and just talk through it with somebody. Okay. Look at the hotline as like your discrimination therapist, like figuring out like what's going on with discrimination. And pregnancy discrimination is something that we see.
So I think we have to go.
Oh, you're gonna go?
Yeah, it's time to pray. I wish I can
It's Juma today.
Today is Juma for them. They do Juma.
Oh,
So
right.
it's one of the time.
This
You
is
will
their
take
day
it in
of
a couple
worship.
minutes. Yeah.
You do
Thank you
Juma.
very much.
Look, I hope you learned something.
Oh yeah, a lot. And I hope your African diaspora liaison that
Fridays
so I
is
hope you can
this
send
Juma.
him out too.
Oh,
To reach
Ahmed?
out. Yeah.
Ahmed? Yeah.
Whoever it is, I don't know. At least reach out.
He's going to continue. So you're going to come back again?
Yeah.
Today?
Oh, you're gonna come back?
After Maghrib?
We'll pray I think around the
So
7th.
if you come back, I can give you like a snapshot of what you missed.
Okay.
No problem.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, so remember I was talking about domestic workers. So again,
Take home
domestic
Friday.
workers are protected class in the human rights law. And real quick, a shout out to our domestic workers. The reason that I have the privilege to talk about domestic workers is because they organize themselves as an industry to demand that they be included in the New York City human rights law. Because a lot of them are Black and brown immigrant women, a lot of them are undocumented. They were facing a lot of systemic abuse and oppression and human rights discrimination working in that industry. Because sometimes when you work in someone's home, it's, it could be a very dangerous situation because sometimes they can ask you for sexual favors so that you can keep your job, etc. So they organize themselves as an industry to make themselves included in the New York City human rights law. And when you report something that has to do with discrimination, remember, like nobody can retaliate against you because it's an additional violation to the human rights law. So age, we talked about that, is a violation of the human rights law to discriminate against anybody because of their age, no matter how old or young they are, because young people, believe it or not, are also discriminated against. And we also go after people that not only discriminate outright, but discriminate based on perception. So let's say that, what's your name? Rebecca. Let's say that Rebecca is 90 years old, right? But, she looks like she's like in her mid-20s. And then they're saying, oh, like Rebecca, yeah, she's too young. Like, I don't think that she has the experience. I'm just going to like give her like an administrator role so she can like, learn. Not knowing that she's like 90 years old and like she has all this experience, valuable experience, job academic wise. So she was just discriminated against based on perception. So that's also illegal under the human rights law. Okay. So disparate impact, really important concept. This applies not only to age, but all the protected classes. So let's say that, we are working somewhere. And Stephen is again our boss, and then Stephen is not paying any of us, or he's paying all of us like below $60 an hour, or he's getting at us because we're unionizing against it, things like that, right? Or he's like committing labor violations for all of us. So in that case, it's not discrimination. It's only discrimination if he's targeting specific communities, specific protected classes of the human rights law. So let's say that he's like not paying undocumented communities less, right? Because they're undocumented, right? So that's discrimination. But if he's treated everybody the same, it's not discrimination. Because I get a lot of calls to the office and people that reach out to me and be like, hey, somebody's, I'm being discriminated against. Like, I'm not getting heat and hot water. It's like, okay, wait, let's like take it back. Like, is everybody in the building not getting heat and water? Yes, none of us are getting heat and hot water. So like, wait, that's not discrimination. You gotta go and like organize, you gotta like report it to HPD, etc. So I just wanted to highlight that. Salary history we talked about. Okay, salary transparency and job advertisements. Does anybody know about this? So basically, let's pick on somebody else. Let's pick on Francis. So let's say that Francis is hiring, right? And as per law, the New Human Rights Law, as of November 1st, 2022, a couple of years ago, all employers that are hiring for positions have to put a good faith job salary range so that the people that are applying for those positions can know what the job is going to pay. Because remember before, like, you would apply and you wouldn't know like what the job salary was. But now employers, like Francis, they need to put a minimum and a maximum salary for the positions that they're advertising. Did people know that?
I was completely unfamiliar with that.
Okay, so now you know.
That's
It's called salary
interesting.
transparency.
I didn't know that either.
I didn't know it was so recent that
Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, that was so recently that it was.
Yeah,
I thought it was-
that's what I'm saying. Like the law, changes sometimes.
I learned something new.
That's why we don't like record the presentations because we don't want like older versions of information to be out there. But yeah, really important. We talked about gender identity and expression. Does anybody have any questions on this? You're good? Okay. Sexual harassment, we have a sense of what that is. It's something that's illegal in the human rights law. It's something that if it's happening to you in the workplace or in any area of society, you could definitely reach out to the Commission on Human Rights about it. Especially if you bring it up to your employer and they're not doing anything to protect you, the employer now becomes liable, right? So there's like trainings that, I don't know, Stephen, if you want to have them do a training online in the future about sexual harassment. It's done in 10 different languages. And it's not only something that happens to women, men also experience sexual harassment too. So, I think that's pretty self-explanatory and it's something that we oversee at the agency and we prosecute. All right, so recap. So remember, reasonable accommodations are special permissions that are given to people from different protected classes of the human rights law. It covers employees with disabilities, pregnant employees, victims of domestic violence, employees who follow religious observances. For pregnant employees, let's say that, Francis is my employer, I'm pregnant, I work as a cashier in a supermarket, cashiers, they work standing up all day. So a reasonable accommodation that I can request from Francis is saying, listen, I'm 6 months pregnant right now, can you give me like a little chair so I can sit down every now and then? Can you give me space so I can go to the bathroom often? Because when you're pregnant, you have to go to the bathroom more often. Can you give me space so I can go and check out my prenatal appointments with my doctor during working hours? And once I have my baby, like he has to, give me safe, private space for me to be able to pump my milk at work and store my milk that I pump out of my breast in the refrigerator at work. Do people know that? You know that?
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't know that, specifically people in the immigrant community don't know that. So those are the kinds of reasonable accommodations for pregnant employees. Okay. So other examples of reasonable accommodations can be at work if somebody has a disability, giving them an assisted breathing device for low vision employees. In housing, it could be, let's say that somebody is deaf and they're at a co-op meeting and a reasonable accommodation that they could request is, can you bring an ASL interpreter so we can follow what's happening in the co-op meetings? Okay, so those are reasonable accommodations. And then we talk about these other accommodations. Okay, now protections in housing, which I think is something that's really interesting. It is unlawful to discriminate in private and public housing, land and commercial spaces. So this means anybody who's selling, renting, leasing, apartments, and things like that, which includes the landlord, the superintendents, the brokers, anybody that you come into contact with in the housing search process has to make sure that they're not discriminating. It's not just the landlord that has to make sure that they're not discriminating. It's everybody around the network of the landlord that has to make sure that they're not discriminating against voucher holders, against Black Americans, against undocumented communities, against people that have children in the home, etc. Right? So if you go to a superintendent, because sometimes, like often, like when you're searching for an apartment, the first people that you come into contact with, like, are supers and porters. So if you have a situation where you have a Section 8 voucher, and they're telling you, oh no, they don't take Section 8 here, like the super is violating the rights law as well. Okay, so I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. So lawful source of income is any legal income, whether it's a subsidy, whether it's a voucher, whether it's Social Security, child support, alimony, foster care subsidies, anything like that is considered a legal source of income that can be used to pay the rent. Landlords can still check credit, that's totally fine, but it becomes discrimination if they're checking the credit of some communities and not others. So they're checking the credit of Black and Brown communities and not white American communities, that's a problem, that's discrimination. And that's something that should be reported to us. And let's say that you have a voucher that pays for 100% of the rent and the utilities, the gas and electric. If you present a voucher like that to a landlord, but then you have a really bad credit score, let's say that your credit score is at 200, a landlord should not deny you housing because of your credit score, because you already have like a legal source of income that pays for all of the rent. So they should not be denying you an apartment based on your credit score. And then we also see the same thing in the home buying process. People like try to steer you into different neighborhoods that they think that you can afford based on your immigration status, based on your race, etc. So I think we talked about reasonable accommodations in housing for people with disabilities already, but a common one that we see are wheelchair ramps, providing those service animals, installing the grab bars and handrails in the bathrooms for people with disability, and allowing somebody who has depression and anxiety to have an emotional support network. This is an example of building before our intervention of the Commission on Human Rights and after our intervention in reports of the Commission on Human Rights. Okay, so the same protections that we saw in housing and employment also exist in the public space, right? So this here is a public space, so then you guys have to be really careful to make sure that you're not creating an environment that promotes discrimination to people. Because you're providing, public services and goods, right? So you have to be really mindful of that in terms of your obligations. So other examples of public accommodations can be stores, supermarkets, taxis, movie theaters, restaurants, schools, hospitals, etc. They all have to, make sure that they're not discriminating. So let's say that Francis owns a supermarket and Francis is only targeting like Black and Latino kids because he thinks that they're going to shoplift in the supermarket. But then when the white American kids come up, like, he's not doing that. But then the ones that end up stealing are the white American kids. So that's an example of that's an example of discrimination of the human rights law. Okay? Or refusing to allow somebody with a wheelchair to go to a restaurant and things like that because there's no space for a wheelchair here. That's discrimination. Well, discriminatory harassment is basically like any kind of discrimination that's connected to harassment that has a pattern of threatening verbal harassment, use of force, intimidation, coercion, cyberbullying. So what I would say for this one is, if you're experiencing something like that, definitely reach out to 911, and also report the pattern of discriminatory harassment to us as well. Okay, so bias-based profiling by law enforcement. I think I said it in the beginning. Law enforcement is not above our law. So anybody that is part of law enforcement that is violating the human rights, they need to be held accountable, and you should feel free to report them. And remember that if you're a city agency providing, city services, you have to make sure that you're providing those services in the language that people feel comfortable with. The only thing is that if you go after a cop for human rights, you're not going to get monetary compensation. That's the only difference. And I'm not sure why that is. But maybe if you email me, like I'll reach out to the policy team to get
Yeah,
back.
that's interesting. That.
But this claim cannot result in monetary awards. But in any other thing that you report outside of law enforcement, you could be entitled to monetary damages, emotional damages. If you're paying, legal fees out of pocket because of discrimination that you're enduring, then that's definitely something that you can potentially get reimbursed back. But not in the case of bias-based law program. Okay? So remember, it's illegal to retaliate against somebody because they're reporting discrimination to the city. So the violations that we assess to people who are violating human rights law is up to $250,000. In addition to all of those monetary compensations that I just mentioned. But if you retaliate against somebody, let's say that Stephen knows that I reported him to the Commission on Human Rights, and all of a sudden he's taking vengeance, and he's demoting me, he's like cutting my pay, that's retaliation. So that's an additional violation. Yeah, the $250,000 is there, I can cover that. Remember, you have the option of going through the office of the chair to appeal a decision that you think was not ruled correctly in your favor.
How long is the appeal period for?
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like it takes sometimes it can take months.
Okay.
So it's a lengthy process. Okay, so these are the community engagement, a section, like the workshops that we do. We do also bystander intervention, days of visibility. So let's say that a law has changed, like in the domestic worker law that I mentioned a couple of years ago. We actually went out to Riverdale because there's like a lot of nannies that work in Riverdale, and we just walked up to them and we partnered with the local elected official up there, the Bronx Public Advocate, like we were there, and also the National Domestic Worker Alliance, and we were just, doing a day of visibility to let people know about these new protections, and a lot of them didn't know. So that's something that if the law changes, like maybe that's something that, we can all do in the future. We can have a day of visibility together. We also do mobile clinics, and that's essentially like, if we're out there in the field, and somebody comes in and reports something, we just, take the person's information and report it, and pass it on to the Legal Enforcement Bureau, and things like that. And we also do specialized trainings that focus on different subjects that impact our communities. Like we have a Trans 1 training, we have a housing training, and things like that. And this is like a really important slide for you to take a picture of. This is like our hotline that I mentioned earlier for you to report discrimination matters. And that's our website that has a lot of great information. So I'll leave that here and, focus on immigration specifically, because I know that that's why we're all here, but I just thought it was important to give you like a broad overview. So essentially, people that are immigrants, are protected classes under the human rights law. Super, super important. So people are immigrants, basically are folks that are undocumented, legal residents, even American citizens of immigrant origin, like me. I'm an American citizen, but I'm of immigrant origin. I could be discriminated against. So let's say that there's a situation where we're all working together. And a third of us are undocumented, the other third is legal resident, and the other third is American citizen. And then Stephen, our boss, decides to pay the undocumented members of the community $7 an hour. The minimum salary in New York City as of January of this year, I believe, is $16 an hour. And then he decides to pay the legal residents $12 an hour. Well, I'm going to pay you guys a little bit higher because you guys have papers. But it's still not the $16 an hour that he's supposed to pay. But then to the American citizens, he pays $16 an hour. So Stephen, in that situation, would absolutely be violating the human rights law. Because under the human rights law, people need to be paid the same regardless of your immigration status, right? So, as you all may know, New York City is a sanctuary city. So, we try to protect immigrants here to a great extent. That's why these protections exist in our law. So, just because you're undocumented, it does not mean that you cannot report something to the Commission on Human rights. You're a protected class with human rights law as an undocumented person. You have rights in housing, you have rights in employment. And believe it or not, these things happen every single day because you're all really educated and you're privileged in the sense that you have access to city government, your community board members, you're very knowledgeable. But people outside of this office, like in the community, don't know like a lot of the things that we're learning about today. So it's really important for you guys to be ambassadors to share this information with people in the community, let them know just because you're documented, you have rights. Stephen, for instance, if he ends up threatening those of us that are undocumented in the workplace from organizing to fight for our $16 an hour, and then he turns around and tells us, well, if you guys keep doing that, you're all undocumented, so I'm just gonna call ICE to deport all of you. That is something else that we see every single day. And you may think, oh no, that's like kind of extreme, but it happens every single day. And I've met people in the community at resource fairs, at meetings, and things like that, that when they see the human rights logo, they come, right? And they say, hey, like, this is what's happening to me. You know, like, I haven't been paid in 2 or 3 months. Can you imagine that?
Mhm.
Like, worrying about bills, like, worrying about food, and on top of that, like, you're not gonna be paid for my months. And then the explanation that we don't have money right now, like, you have to keep waiting. But you know, if you keep complaining about it, I'm just gonna have to call ICE to report you.
Yeah,
So you just
I
have to
find-
keep quiet for now.
I find that especially among the undocumented, many times there's a fear,
Oh, it's absolutely.
you know, and I have spoken to people who tell me, what am I gonna do? You know, that they're very afraid that because, as a matter of fact, did that bill get passed? There was a rally, I know, last year about a bill of getting ICE out of the court.
Oh.
Did it get passed finally?
I think they might.
Yeah, because I remember I was helping.
But you know, you have my email.
Yeah,
Email me
I am.
so I can verify for sure. But I believe it did.
Mhm.
That was something that was like really.
And there are a lot of
scary.
undocumented people who are working,
Right.
you know, who feel, and many of them are vulnerable to that.
Yeah. So I really like coming to this community because there is a lot of need in this community. There's a lot of undocumented members of the community. Actually, I was telling Stephen, I gave a presentation all over the church that's mostly like, you know, undocumented members of the community go for assistance. And you'd be surprised, like they don't know and they're scared. So what I tell them is the same thing that I told all of you, like undocumented people get protected in the law. So I had a real situation of 4 undocumented members of the community that I met, you know, at a resource fair. And what I liked about them is that they had the courage to record when their boss was telling them, hey, like you're undocumented, so if you keep doing what you're doing, like we're gonna deport you. That's like a real thing, right? So then when they submitted that evidence to me, I was like, yeah, like I'm gonna submit all this evidence, audio recording, all of that to our legal team. Our legal team like is looking at it. And they put the construction company on notice that they're violating the human rights law. And now, you know, that there's a process. And I also reported it to the New York State Department of Labor, the Wage and Theft Division as well. So like those 2 agencies are looking at it. So if this is something that works out, this is something that, because of the human rights law, this is something that's going to put food on the table for those people, those vulnerable people in the community. So I know that this was a lot of information, and I apologize, but
No, but
it was so
great.
important.
That was great.
To
That
learn
was
about
great
it,
information.
because one of the catchphrases that I'm like, you know, using now more often is when I give presentations, is that the New York City human rights law is something that can save your life. It's something that can put food on your table. It's something that, you know, can give you income and protect your job. So you know, the New York City human rights law, if you look at it, is something that can, you know, impact like these bread and butter issues that we care about. It can literally put food on your table, right? And then in housing, the protections that people have in housing is, you know, very similar. So let's say that we're all living in a building, half of us are documented, the other half are not. And then it's the undocumented people that are not getting repairs and things like that. And they're also being threatened with deportation. That happens every single day, especially in this community. So, you know, that's that. And then there's also something that's called illegal lockout. I don't even know what that is. So legal lockout is sometimes when landlords, when they don't want you there anymore, whether you rent or not, or whether you want the apartment back for their family, instead of taking you through a normal housing court process to evict you, they just decide to change the locks on you and just take your stuff out of the apartment.
Right.
So then that is definitely something that happens to a lot of people in the undocumented space. And because they don't know their right, they don't know that they have the right to call 911 on the landlord, because the landlord is not supposed to do that. The landlord is supposed to go through a formal housing court process to evict anybody, right? And there's also a little bit of a difference too. You guys know the difference between rent stabilized and non-stabilized housing. So rent stabilization, they have more rights. Rent stabilized tenants have more rights than the tenants that are not stabilized. So that's like an important consideration. So let's say that you're living in a private house, you're not going to have the same tenant protections that somebody in a rent stabilized unit like has. So, but you still have some protection. So let's say that Steven is our landlord. I'm living in a private market rate unit. He wants to evict me, fine. But if I've been living there a year, he has to give me 30 days to reorganize and figure out another housing situation. If I've been living there, for 2 years, he has to give me 60 days. And I've been living there for more than 3 years, he has to give me 90 days, right? It can be a situation where he's telling you, okay, you gotta do this between now and tomorrow, right? Because that's part of state law. These are protections that exist, for tenants. So I always tell people, when you're in an apartment, in a space, in your housing search, definitely figure out the type of housing that you're getting into, so that you won't be surprised down the line, if something happens, so you can know the protections that you have. And now, let's say that you end up getting evicted, you go through the court, you're in the housing court process. Now I believe that the New York State Attorney General has put in guidelines to make sure that communities that have been through the court process in housing court, are not denied housing opportunity because they have a housing court record. And that's something that you can look at with the New York State Attorney General's office. So I feel in terms of immigration, I feel that's pretty comprehensive. And I also want to clarify, we don't collaborate with ICE, right? We do not divulge anybody's immigration status to the authorities, to the federal government, state government. That's confidential with us. So our friends that I was telling you about, that I helped them report this claim to the legal division, I never sent that information to ICE. We have policies and trainings at the commission internally to say, be careful, you cannot collaborate with ICE as a city human rights employee, right? That's something that we take very seriously. And then what else can I say about immigration? Yeah, I would say that, you can't discriminate against somebody because of the national origin. So I'll just give you a quick example. I'm sure that you all have known that there's tensions between Dominicans and Haitians. You've heard about this, right? There's tensions between Dominicans and Haitians, historically. So let's say that half of us are Haitians working at Steven's job, at Steven's company, and half of us are Dominicans. And let's say that the Dominicans are being prejudiced towards the Haitian community. So right there, that's discrimination based on national origin. We're saying disparaging things about the Haitian community because of the skin color, the hair texture. That's all discrimination. And that's something that happens not only in the Dominican and Haitian community, but throughout the world. These tensions that exist because, let's face it, colonialism, imperialism, and the ways that the European powers divided our communities that have resulted in these intergenerational or generational traumas and things like that. But that's another conversation for another day outside of this training. But yeah, that's discrimination. Okay, so if there's anything I can leave you with today is that immigrant communities are amazing. I'm really happy that you guys are doing this work and that you cared enough to invite me to talk a little bit about this. And the law really protects people in the community. And when it works and when the case that's brought forward meets the threshold of using human rights law, there's real consequences and protections that come into place. right? So yes, we'll leave it at that. And like, if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to take them. But do you feel like you learned something today?
Oh,
Thank you.
yeah. Oh, yes, I learned a lot.
Thank you,
Oh, yes, I
Madam
learned a lot.
Lopez. We highly appreciate your time
A lot.
and the explanation. It is more than an hour. It's like we start like 6:15. Now 7. Yeah, the presentation
Oh my
going
God.
on.
It's okay.
So there's a lot of resources. There's a lot of things we don't know, and it is the opportunity to know for all of us. Right now, his presentation is finished. Then I open the floor to ask questions,
Okay.
and floor is open. Madam Ortiz, if you have
Well,
any questions.
I mean, I learned a lot of things
Yeah.
today. The situation with the hair is interesting, okay? Because I was born and raised right here in this country. Maybe Stephen, maybe you are. And we were discriminated because of our curly hair. We were told that because our hair was not straight, there were places that did not accept us. Let me put it that way. So that situation with the hair, I had a friend that she was an airline stewardess, and because she braided her hair, they told her they were going to fire her, and somebody did make a case out of it, and I think it did settle. Yeah, but I know a lot of friends that went through that. As a matter of fact, I know a lot of friends in the corporate world, and all of them, when they reach the executive.
Welcome back.
Okay, welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome
Sorry
back.
to interrupt.
Assalamu alaikum, my brother. Welcome back.
So before, he's coming back with us, so I'm sorry to interrupt you, but in terms of the immigration piece, because now you guys are all experts.
Right.
Can a couple of you volunteer to, what's your name?
Isa.
Isa?
Yes. ISSA.
Am I saying correctly? Isa?
Isa. Yes.
Okay. Can a few of you volunteer to basically summarize like the immigration protections for people in the community?
Well,
So we can walk away?
okay, one of the biggest highlights that I learned about is about the rights of employment. And there are, for example, a lot of immigrants that many times don't even get paid what they should get paid. And my question was about like some undocumented people who feel very afraid to report because they feel they have no rights. And I found out, thank you for that information. That's very valuable. That yes, they can report it, and ICE has nothing to do with getting involved with that. Also about the accommodations for people with disabilities. Okay, but it was good that we were able to capitalize on the situations of immigrants because I know a lot of them, and this district of ours has a big population of immigrants, and I noticed that actually they're hardworking people.
Oh, yeah,
I'm not going to
they-
be
they- yeah.
judgmental here, but immigrants do things that I as an American wouldn't do. I'm going to be honest with you. There are jobs that they do that I would,
Especially during COVID, like
hmm
the city ran during COVID because of the immigrants,
yeah.
because of the undocumented community specifically.
hmm
So we owe a lot to the immigrants.
Well, that's important. That was important. When I DoorDash, when I get lazy and I don't feel like cooking at home, and I DoorDash, because we all do that, don't we? But the people who are delivering, and I notice that all the delivery people who come in are immigrants. You see what I'm saying? So obviously we are surviving on the labor. So it's good to know that they do have rights. And I didn't know myself that, especially my concern was about the undocumented people because many of them are also fearful. There's a lot of fear of what they can access, and many of them don't know that. And then you spoke about the landlords and the right of housing. Again, a lot of people, especially if they're not from this country, think, and some of these landlords could be something else. If they see that a person is from a certain country, even or a certain, they might be a little bit discriminative. Well, they actually have a right to bring that up to the Human Rights Commission,
Absolutely.
and that's important to know. That was good information.
Well, one of the things that I forgot to mention that I think is relevant is something that's called labor deferred action. Have you guys heard of what that is? Labor deferred action. This is something that I just want to clarify too. Like, we don't help people like with citizenship or anything like that or naturalization. we exist to enforce key protections for immigrant communities, but at the end of the day, immigration is a federal issue. So if you want to get naturalized and things like that, there's organizations and legal representation that can help you with that. There's also your local congress people. So let's say that you submitted a citizenship application, you want to know what the status is, etc. You should definitely go to your local congress's office because they can kind of like check on the status for you. I used to work for a local congressmember here before he retired, and that's something that his constituent services would do like often. But labor deferred action, let's say that an employer is violating the rights of an undocumented person that is currently in deportation proceedings. So if that employee reports that to an enforcement agency, like, I don't know, DHS or whatever, right? Like, if they report something to an enforcement agency that has to do with labor rights and human rights violation, their deportation proceedings can get paused, right? And the reason that it gets paused is to let the employee stay here a little bit longer so that they can cooperate with the enforcement agency against the employer. To kind of be like a witness of sorts.
Oh.
And that's something that's called labor deferred action that I encourage you to look at it. It's a double-edged sword because then they give you like a temporary ID number and things like that. And if you don't want to be found as a documented person, that's something to consider. But it's a good thing for you guys to know about, especially because you're in this community. And then in terms of other resources, I would encourage you to look into the Bronx Immigration Partnership. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're basically a coalition of non-for-profit Bronx-based immigration organizations that basically like look at policy that's coming from Washington to let people in the community know, like, what's happening at the federal level.
What's the name of the Bronx
It's
Immigration?
called the Bronx Immigration Partnership, and they have monthly meetings that happen virtually. I think that they are in recess during the summertime. But Stephen, if you want me to connect you, just
Sure,
remind me
please send me an email. I'll send you an email and then.
because I feel like that's relevant for this community board specifically, just because there's so many undocumented members of the community. And maybe you may want to sit in that meeting like every now and then
Sure.
and not hear what's being said. So you can share it with
So I
the-
can disperse you.
Yeah, or even like the chair of the board.
Madam Lopez, we just want to thank you. All the useful resources that we need to know, community need to know.
Yeah.
This is an awesome opportunity, and we just want to say thank you that you bring all the resources for the community, for our board. And I'm thinking, Mr. Stephen, later on, when we have a full board meeting, we want to be like engage our full board members. We have a limited people, and we're going to invite them. They will deliver their.
Or maybe you guys can even report a little bit about what you learned about immigration today to the full board, because I believe that the district manager has like a report or like
Yes.
the individual committees, like you guys report, right?
Yes, we have to
Something that the
report.
full board
Well,
can-
When
Yeah.
we have a full board meeting, then we have to report. Immigration committee have to report. What kinds of resources that you bring? Actually, you have all these things on your paper.
And you
So-
can put that in the packets.
Yeah, so it's going to be on my statement when I put on the full board meeting.
And then in terms of like local organizations that are really near you, have you heard of the Mercy Center?
Yes.
So the Mercy Center is great, like we do a lot of work with them. And I'm sure that you know about the Mexican Coalition.
Yeah.
Yes,
Just because it says
I
Mexican
know.
Coalition, they
We
help
have a-
everybody.
yes.
And I also
I'm
want to
aware
say
of
that
that.
like immigration is not a Latino issue because a lot of people think it's just a Latino issue.
No, it is
No,
not.
no,
It's
it affects a lot of people.
Yeah.
International. Even like Irish people in Woodlawn.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of undocumented Irish people in Woodlawn. And a lot of people don't know.
Madam Lopez, I
I
give the
found that
opportunity.
out.
If anybody else has
Yes.
any questions, any concern, you can ask. This floor is open.
Do you
If not,
feel like you
we'll
caught up
go
a
to
little
the-
bit, or-
Oh, yeah.
Does anybody else want to share with him, or Rebecca, if you want to share with him things that you know about immigration law? To Lisa?
One of the things that we were talking about was the tenants about I don't remember what we were talking about.
right.
Yeah, it was like about their rights, about like being
Opportunities, yeah.
evicted as well. So like tenants, they can't like evict you like if
For the landlord.
the landlord, yeah, sorry. the landlord cannot evict you if you're a tenant. They
Yeah.
can't just like lock you out of your building. Like that's also like a you can report that as well.
You
Yeah,
should report that to 911.
to 911. Yeah, and we were also talking about depending on like the type of housing, there's different types of like laws that are required for different kinds of housing as well, right? Yeah,
Right.
it just
And,
varies.
we were also talking about the importance of knowing the kind of housing that you live in.
Yeah.
Because depending on the kind of housing that you live in, you may have more rights or less rights. And finally, there's a great website that you may already know about, Stephen, that you should share with people in the community board, justfix.nyc. Have you heard of it?
I actually haven't, but
So look it up,
we'll-
Just Fix NYC, and that's a great resource because it tells you if you live in rent stabilized housing or not. Let's say that you need repairs in your apartment and the landlord is not complying. Through that website, you can put the address, and it sends a list of repairs that you select, and it drafts like a form letter, and it sends it to your landlord certified receipt for free.
Oh, good.
So look at
.org. .org. It says .org here. I just looked it up.
Oh, that works.
Yeah.
Not NYC, but yeah, that's it.
But I can send an email to the committee members
Okay,
so you
thank you.
guys can get the link.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, so that's all I have to share.
Thank you, Madam Lopez, for bringing us all the resources
No,
to your work. And thank you again, all my members, all my attendees. I want to make sure, if you don't any questions or anything, I will move forward for any old businesses. You have any old
I
business?
actually have to bring just something out that the district manager wanted me to bring up, if I may, Chair.
Yes, sir, please, thank you.
So this is in regards to the district needs assessment that's been going around. A few members have been in other committees, have been hearing about it. But the Community District Needs Assessment asks for community board input on pressing issues facing the district. For example, affordable housing, more parks and open spaces, stop signs, lampposts, etc. The assessment can help determine how to accomplish strategic goals and make quality of life enhancements in the district. The deadline for the Community District Needs Assessment is October 29th, 2024. Just want to bring that up to the committee.
So it is the informational things that we discussed,
Yes,
and anybody will you?
Okay, the deadline is
October
October
29th.
29, so one more one.
October 29.
So next
Okay,
month, yeah.
but I'm gonna be emailing you,
Sure. Yes, please
and
email bx01
to make sure that I'm on time
@cv.nyc.gov.
with the list of assessments.
Yes.
Because you know what my campaign is, I think that people should be fined when they don't pick up after their dogs.
Yes.
But that's a whole different issue.
And that's it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
thank you. Steve, I
That's
hope I
my
will
campaign.
email you too. I just feel like our district has money making this area.
Right.
It's very dairy. And the park is big problem.
At the
We take our
sanitation
kids,
committee, we
It's
spoke about that.
overcrowded.
Yeah, so any
Crazy
feedback, yeah, just send an email to the BX01 email and then we'll add that to the assessment.
Yes,
Okay.
I'm gonna be
If
sending
That's
that.
not
all.
anything, then we can move forward. Any new businesses? If it's not new businesses, then we can extend to adjournment to this meeting. I can get a motion.
Okay, so I will make a motion that we adjourn our meeting for today. So you can second it.
Discussion, anybody abstain? So motion passed, we will let this one. Before we move,
So
we
the
like,
last thing is, if, part of this is the evaluation, so just take a little scan this QR code and let me know how I did.
Oh, you did excellent. Well, you
And-
look-
meeting adjourned today. Thank you all.
Okay.
Because that helps us strengthen our presentation.
So